The date was June 7th, 2017. The scent of fresh asphalt and wet dog clung to the humid evening air as I brought my trash can up from the curb. Tonight was the night that I would run my first game of Dungeons & Dragons. I texted my players to let them know that I was ready and that I had just picked up the hot and ready pepperoni pizzas. They responded shortly after, and my heart sank. Over the past month, I had been painstakingly crafting an adventure for them, something that I was determined to make unforgettable. But now that the night was here ahead of me, now that I knew I had no time left to prepare, I was panicked. What if all of the hours that I had spent preparing for this ended up being for nothing? What if all of the NPCs that I had created, all of the combat encounters that I had tested, all of them were just trash? What if I was making all of this up and I had nothing prepared, and I only just started thinking about that 30 minutes before my players were set to arrive? So we intro with our two characters, Baldur the human barbarian and Alistair the elderly gnome wizard, seated sort of quietly, alone, enjoying a nice dinner at a tavern by the name of the Mottled Matron. Baldur was a little bit peeved starting things off. He had just completed a quest given to him by a cloaked, mysterious half-orc individual who had asked him to go a little bit out of town and basically rescue what was a stolen trading vessel that had been taken over by a group of pirates. Baldur completed this task, and after rescuing the crew, brought them back to town, only to find that the individual who had paid him up front 750 gold had now skipped town with the remaining 3/4 of the reward. After several hours of searching around, he ended up just giving up. He reconvened with his friend Alistair and decided, you know what, screw it. I'm tired of this damn goose chase. Let's go drink. Alistair, the now nearly 500-year-old elderly gnome, who had spent most of his life hermetically sealed in a mountain, is okay with this prospect.
Yes, I didn't even participate in this, and honestly, I'm tired of walking.
I'm not going to be doing a perfect recreation of what my players were performing for their characters, but I'm going to do my best, you know? I'll never be able to top Atticus's performance of Alistair in particular. He made sure that anytime he was talking, he was in character. And not only that, but he was always shaking his hands and, just making this little voice. It was 100% perfection. Anyway, our heroes are just sort of seated at the bar, unwinding from a rather fruitless day and taking in a pint or two, when all of a sudden, from the back door leading to an alley, a halfling street urchin runs in, clutching a note. The young halfling scans the room, appearing to be looking for someone in particular, when his eyes lock with Baldur's. Baldur stands out a little bit, to say the least. He's like 6'5", has a blonde ponytail, big old beard, and on his back is a rather unorthodox weapon, a dragon's tooth, carved down so that it can be gripped in two hands and swung around like a giant club. The kid runs over, looks up at him, and asks,
Excuse me, sir. Are you Baldur?
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is for you.
And about that time, I get up, I run over, and I hand Jordan a note. In the 15 minutes of actual planning I had for this game, I decided that I needed a physical prop to get my players into the story. So I grabbed a piece of paper, I kind of tore off the edges a little bit, made it look a little rough, took it outside, I rubbed it in some dirt, I put some water on it, I crinkled it, wrung it out, then I brought it inside to dry on top of my fridge. After it had a little bit of time to dry, I wrote a message on it, and that was what I handed to him. It looked awful. It looked like it had been in the pocket of some kid who lived on the streets and probably got his last meal out of a gutter. That's what I was going for. Jordan takes the note and kind of actually flinches a little bit, kind of caught off guard because it's still a little bit wet, and In a way, it kind of resembled used toilet paper. So Baldur, and by extension Jordan, starts reading this message, and as he does so, his eyebrow just sort of cocks up a little bit, and he keeps looking to me a little bit confused. And it's because this note has terrible handwriting and terrible spelling. And that was intended. This is written by a kid who has probably little to no formal education. And I wanted to reflect that. It read as follows. Dear Baldur, your help is urgently needed in the village of Bayrain. Please travel there immediately and locate a man named Barton Migsborn. Travel quickly and then show him this letter. Do not speak of this to anyone else. You will be greatly rewarded for your efforts, as dictated by Madrigal. Alistair tries to read the note, but is unable to because it's in Halfling, which he doesn't speak. Baldur speaks Halfling because it's the trade language of the world, which I won't get into that, that's a whole other thing. But Baldur, has been active in the world. Alistair has been living in a cave for close to 400 years. Baldur looks back down from the note to see that the Halfling kid is standing there with his hand outreached. He assumes that means that he wants a tip, so he hands him a couple silver and the kid happily runs on his way. So, exactly why this note was delivered to him, he's not 100% sure, but he's got a big hint in the name at the bottom, Madrigal. Madrigal is sort of one of the code names given to one of the court mages to the ruler of Baldur's home nation, the Kingdom of Ardone. So Baldur is sort of a minor celebrity from his home nation. He has the equivalent of what I guess you could call knighthood status, and as a result, he's rubbed shoulders with some of the political elite, like the king himself. During this particular event where he received his knighthood status, Baldur met with Madrigal, one of the king's court mages, who, though their meeting was brief, went ahead and added Baldur to her mental Rolodex of sorts. A grouping of people that, if she ever needed an agent out in the field, for something of importance to the kingdom, she'd have somebody to reach out to. And in this particular instance, though Baldur doesn't yet know it, he's the closest person available to the kingdom's goals. Jordan asks if he can make a history check to see what Bayrain even is, and he makes a relatively good one. Baldur has proficiency in history, and I believe it was like a 16 or 17. With that history check, I tell Jordan that Baldur would probably be aware that Bayrain is a sort of remote military port town, about 2 to 3 days travel from his current location in Gum Harbor, and is sort of just a strategic but relatively unknown port out in the middle of the ocean. The concerning fact of the matter here is that Bayrain is currently occupied by the Feymain Republic, a former empire to the north that now stands as a long-held enemy to Baldur's home nation's confederacy, the Triumph of Naman. Ultimately, all these names and little bits of history I'll be throwing out aren't terribly important to you guys, but they kind of mattered to my players at the time because they kind of helped build the world, so I'm just going to throw them out there. You can ignore them for the most part. I'll let you know if any names are super important. Basically, all you need to know is that Baldur is a little bit worried by this, because this means that he is going to be a foreign agent going into enemy territory during a time when there is currently a treaty of peace. And that's arguably grounds for provocation for war. Having said that, Baldur goes, Alright, little buddy, let's head out.
I thought you said we were done with walking.
It's nearing around 8 p.m., and the note did say that they were urgently needed, so Baldur decides that if there's any time to set out, it's now. He relays the information that the note read to Alistair, and the two of them head down to the docks to begin looking for some sort of ship to get themselves out of Gum Harbor. Basically uncertain of how to charter a boat to head to this remote island, specifically at this time in the evening, they look to me and ask what they can do. I was like, I don't know, maybe you could ask around, roll an investigation check or something. Well, in my head, I was like, oh god, how do I get them off of this city and out to an island in less than 3 days? I should have thought this ahead. They decide to split up and roll investigation checks separately, and they don't roll above like a 7. It's pretty sad. So I take the higher one's roll, which I think was Baldur, and I'm quickly thinking in my head, I'm like, give me just a second, let me check my notes. This is a tactic that I would rely on heavily throughout this campaign. I would say, give me just a moment, let me check my notes. And then quickly move myself behind the screen and think, while just maybe clicking or writing stuff down, doodling. I wasn't really doing anything. I was thinking, what can I do next? Alright, they didn't get a good check, so I can't give them exactly what they want, but I do need to get them to their destination in time for this to actually be a game that they can play. So I tell Baldur that he sees a group of rough and tumble individuals still gathered around a sort of rinky-dink fishing trawler out by the docks. The group looks a little shady, probably not the safest bet, but nonetheless, Baldur approaches and asks if they have any sort of leads that he could follow on where to get a ride at this time of night. Before any of them have the chance to respond, though, an angry little man jumps up from below the deck.
Who are you? What do you want? We have our permits.
Now, just a second ago I said he was a little man, but he was actually a Gaboon, which is my very own original race, do not steal. Looking back, I should have just made him like a dwarf or something, adding in this race that my players had never dealt with before on a whim really only served to muddle the situation and make things a little more complicated when they didn't need to be, but he was a memorable character and he'll come into play later again. Baldur explains that the two of them are looking for some means of travel to Bayrain, and that they're willing to pay a pretty penny to get there quickly. This piques the interest of our little goblin man, baboon, boat captain person. And he explains that,
Travel to Bayrain? 200 gold each.
Nah, I just got screwed over with payment recently, but how about 50 gold each?
Don't f*** with me. 300 gold now. Take it or leave it.
They didn't like that result, needless to say, but regardless, they ended up paying him half up front with the promise to pay the other half later. I would surmise that probably the reasoning there was that, a little bit meta here, they had just started the game and they knew it was going to be a one-shot, and that gold probably wouldn't be super important and they already had some starting off, so what's the big deal about spending a little bit? And then also, they had failed their investigation check pretty badly, so this is probably the only option they were going to find for quick transport off the island. Turns out I was wrong. Never underestimate your players. After a little bit of negotiation on the boat, they convinced him that they needed to book it there. And along the way, they talked to some of the crew members just as time passed. I believe it ended up being about a day and a half spent on that ship. Other than the rather unwelcoming captain, who spent most of his time in his own quarters, occasionally popping out to angrily stare at our players, the crew was made up of a couple of half-orcs and one human. Nobody in the group shared a common language with the half-orcs, but the human spoke the southern equivalent of what was common. I guess I should get into this a little bit. The world didn't really have a common language, and I wanted to do that just to see how it would play out. There were three most common tongues at play in the continent of Mirren. Those were the normal sort of southern Mirren common, which was mainly spoken in areas like the Triumph of Naman, which is the confederacy that also housed Baldur's nation. There's Halfling, which is spoken in sort of the middle territories and is treated as sort of a trade language between the north and the south, in these areas of neutral ground. And then lastly, you've got, to the north, in the Famian Republic, Elvish, because that culture is very elf-centric. We'll get into the culture a little bit in a minute because it's actually important to what they do in the story, but despite being elf-centric, it's actually run by humans and half-elves. Anyway, of these languages, Baldur speaks all three of them, so he's got sort of a common tongue for every situation. Alistair, on the other hand, speaks Gnomish, Draconic, and then Elvish, leaving him with only Elvish as a common tongue, and so far they have not actually been around anybody that speaks Elvish, so he's had to rely on Baldur for pretty much all of his communication. This was pretty much all Atticus's decision to have happen, and I was cool with it. It had a lot of funny roleplay moments that came up as a result. Anyway, during their journey to Bayrain, Baldur ends up making a bit of a friendly acquaintance with the human crewmen aboard the ship, them both sharing a common tongue in South Murin. He finds out between a little bit of questioning, a little bit of inference, and a little bit of investigation check that this is not a normal fishing trawler, and in fact, they don't fish at all. This is a smuggling boat. He just sort of silently nods his head a little bit and decides that he'll bide his time with that info. For now, he's going to take a rest, and hopefully they'll be at Bayrain pretty soon. Our heroes awaken from a turbulent yet long rest below deck to the sounds of the captain shrieking from up above. As they climb the ladder up to the deck surface, they're greeted by a thick fog, accompanied by the light drizzle of rain. Looking out onto the horizon, they see the faint silhouette of a landmass. Baldur and Alistair. As the two stand side by side, ignoring the petulant demands of the ship's captain, they begin to question why they were truly sent here. Little do they know that within a single 24-hour span, the two of them will have experienced more in one day than any other being of their kind has experienced in a lifetime. Okay, so that took way longer than it needed to. I can't even begin to talk about the number of hurdles that I've run into in the process of making this second video. It's been a nightmare, but it's a fun nightmare. Like, I'm gonna just throw something funny up there. I'm forcing myself to release a video because if I don't, I'm gonna keep restarting over and over like I've been doing for the last 3 months. But know that in the process of this, I've learned some things. Like, I think there's better ways to convey like lore dump information. It could probably be fit in a little more organically. Really, what I'm saying all this for is I want you guys to give, feedback that I can learn from. The 8 of you that see this video. But yeah, thanks for watching. The first video I spent the whole time talking about people, and the second video I spent the whole time talking about the introduction in the game. So I think that's officially all possible introduction. The next part of this video series will be the game itself. But I'm sure I can find some other random bullshit to throw in that's totally unrelated and drags us out for another 8 videos,
Come Saturday, jump at Chelsea Brigade. I've been a trender, it's all in